So Dr. Shane Doyle, a member of the Apsalica or Crow tribe, is a Montana-based scholar, writer, performing artist, and community advocate whose work focuses on the deep history and cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples of the northern Great Plains. Shane holds a doctorate in curriculum and instruction from Montana State University and completed a postdoc research appointment in genetics with the University of Copenhagen in 2016. Shane helped lead the Yellowstone Reveal All Nations Teepee Village in the summer of 2022, which I believe was, they had set it up near the Gibbon River in Yellowstone National Park, and is actually currently a full-time cultural consultant who flew in from Bozeman today. Shane and I know each other because we both served together on the Extreme History Project, which is based out of Bozeman. It's an organization that does a lot with walking tours and advancing research of stories that people aren't as familiar with. And I don't even know if Shane knows he's going to be on Facebook Live. So all those people on Facebook Live, I apologize for my long-winded stories. Actually, I don't mind. A microphone and a historian actually go together. So. And as I mentioned, his recent article in Big Sky Journal, which I highly recommend, summer of 2023, just came out. Shane reflects on his people's relationship to golden eagles, and it is a really awesome piece, so I highly recommend it. So anyway, we're getting close, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we are.
I'm waiting for it to load.
Yeah, you can just bring that right on up.
Okay. And probably Shane has spoken here, I don't know, every 4 years.
Yeah.
Something of that nature, and something completely different each time. And so, like I said, we're really excited. Indigenous peoples in Yellowstone National Park making meaning and medicine in the land of the burning ground. Now the pressure is on poor Lauren over there.
It's fine. Broad shoulders.
Yeah.
No signal.
Why?
Anybody have anything they'd like to share?
Because it's up here. It was just there.
Here,
Yeah,
you
it's just
want
there.
to say hello?
Yeah, sure. Hey, thank you so
you
much
bet.
for that
Thanks.
wonderful killing time for me and
absolutely.
everything.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it. Good to see you. Hey, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Hey. Oh, whoops.
You don't want HDMI for sure.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today, and I'm so sorry for being late. I've really honestly been all over the map here over the past several years, honestly, but just over the past few days have been really all over. So I appreciate your patience, and just want to share a few stories about the Yellowstone Park, some of the stuff that I've been up to, and started working with the Yellowstone Park a couple years ago in preparation of the 150th anniversary. And so I first started working in the Yellowstone Park about 10 years ago. I started teaching a class there in the summer. And so I was asked to teach a class by a group now known as Yellowstone Forever. Back then they were the Yellowstone Association. And so I taught a class at the Lamar Bison Ranch on the history of the Crow tribe in the Yellowstone Park. And it was a lot of fun. So it was about a 2.5-day course, and folks would come, they'd stay in the little cabins there at the Bison Ranch, and then we'd do tours around each day. We'd go to different sites, and I would tell and share stories about the Crow history in Yellowstone Park, which is very extensive, significant, and has really kind of been overlooked a lot by the park itself and largely by historians. And of course, one of the reasons for that is because it's an oral tradition. And these oral traditions, if they're not recorded, if they're not written down, then you either have to hear them from someone face to face, or you have to find a recording of them somewhere. So part of what I've been doing over the past few years is trying to make these stories and this presence of Native people in the Yellowstone Park more apparent and obvious to everyone. So I'm working with the park right now. We do not have any plans for a teepee village this summer, but we do have a lot of plans to start implementing and integrating native stories and place names and other historical information about the park into the official brochures, into the official pamphlets. Also, we want to add signage. So folks who are driving through the Yellowstone Park, when you stop at a certain area, there'll be some signage there. And of course, in the modern era, we have QR codes. So we'll have some websites set up. And so when you're driving through the park, you can take your phone and scan the QR code, and it will take you to a website with more information about that area. So that's all on tap for this summer. That's one of the big projects I have going. Working for the National Parks Conservation Association, and they've really kind of spearheaded a lot of this. So last summer, the 150th anniversary, we did again set up a teepee village at the Madison Junction. Let's see, do I have a clicker? I want to. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I want to. Let's see, where's the, okay. Here's an image here of the original Crow Indian Reservation. But again, kind of reflecting back on last summer, we were able to establish and set up a teepee village there in the park. And there were we had 13 teepees set up. And so each lodge was representative of a different tribe that's associated with the Yellowstone Park. And then we were able to bring in different ambassadors, tribal historians and other ambassadors to come in and speak to tourists and visitors who were curious about the tribal history in the park. So we did that last year in August. We had the teepee set up for about a week. And there's a really nice article in the Billings Gazette. What was the journalist's name? Jake something, I can't think of his last name, but Bruce wrote a really beautiful piece on that. And I learned a lot from the whole experience as well. Just, engaging with all the different tribal members. It took about a year to plan the whole event. It took a lot of money. We had to purchase teepees. Of course, we had to pay for the tribal ambassadors to come and spend time there. And, but I think it was a great success, and we want to continue doing that going into the future. So that project was kind of spearheaded by Mountain Time Arts out of Bozeman. So they're a performance art group. And I've been working with them for several years, actually for about 10 years. And we have been doing performance art projects around the Gallatin Valley and also in the Yellowstone Valley. And then with the 100th anniversary, or 150th anniversary of Yellowstone Park, we decided we would pursue a performance art project in the park. So that's where the teepee village came in. And then we also had, singers, and we had some concerts there over the few days, and a performance art project called Rematriate, where we brought a group in from Wind River, northern Arapaho and eastern Shoshone, and they did a really interesting, innovative performance art dance based on bison coming back into public lands, I think, was the main thrust of that. But just bringing bison back in general. So the folks who put on the dance there at the Teepee Village have also brought bison back to the Wind River Indian Reservation. So it was, again, a great success, and we learned a lot, again, about the different stories associated with the park. I have published over the past year 3 different articles, if you're interested in reading more. One of the pieces is for the National Parks Conservation Association entitled Land of Steam. And in that article, I look at 3 different origin stories associated with the Yellowstone Park. So my tribe, the Apsalaga, we have 3 significant star stories that are also associated with geothermal features in the Yellowstone Park. And so I wrote about that for the National Parks Conservation Association. I also wrote a piece about the scientific research that's been done there in the park. So we have archaeological evidence, and we also have genetic data that correlates to Native people being in the Yellowstone Park as soon as the glaciers melted out, right around 11, 12,000 years ago. We have the genetic data from the Anzac Clovis child, which is about 50 miles north of Gardner, and that's the oldest burial in the Western Hemisphere. So that boy, there was a boy that died there when he was about 2.5 years old, and there was a sequencing that was completed on his genome back in 2013 and indicated that he's related to probably just about every Native person in the Western Hemisphere. And so I entitled that blog piece, Yellowstone's First Family. And in fact, because it's the oldest burial in the Western Hemisphere, it's America's first family that we know of. It is the oldest skeletal remains that have ever been identified here on the continent. And so, yeah, it's 12,600 years old. And we did a PBS Nova film on it. That's available on YouTube. And the title of that documentary is called The Great Human Odyssey. And so it retraces all of the most ancient genetic data that have been archived around the globe and trying to trace how people made it to the different continents out of Africa. So I highly encourage you to check it out. It's about a 2-hour-long documentary film and was nominated for an Emmy for Best Documentary, Science Documentary of 2016. So it's been around for a little while. It's aired on Montana PBS 3 times now. The portion about Montana, about the Anzac Clovis child, comes on at about 1 hour and 13 minutes into the film, and it lasts for about 15 minutes. So we have that really closely associated with the Yellowstone Park. It's a tributary of the Yellowstone River where the boy was found, the Shields and the Shields Valley there. In fact, the first northern tributary of the Yellowstone River flowing from the Shields River Valley. And then I also wrote a piece for the Mountain Outlaw, and that one is entitled Making Meaning and Medicine in the Land of the Burning Ground. And in that piece I look at 5 different, actually 10 different place names in the Yellowstone Park. And I take those 10 different places and I identify them in sets of 2 in terms of the themes that are really prevalent about those place names. So one of the themes is trade. We have hunting, gathering, and trading here in Montana and in the Yellowstone Park. A lot of times anthropologists refer to Native people as hunters and gatherers, but that's kind of two-dimensional. Honestly, we're hunters, gatherers, and traders. So we traded a lot. The Yellowstone Park, there are a couple names in the park that really are significant of that, or that really, I guess, correlate to that trade economy, the hunting and gathering. There are also precious resources in the park that can't be found anywhere else. Obsidian is one of them. Also bighorn sheep bows, which were difficult to find and to make anywhere else outside of the Yellowstone Park. So to make those bows, the hunters had to first harvest the bighorn sheep, then take the horns, soak them in the hot water until they softened. Then they would take them out and cut them and form fit them into bows. Then they would put glue and sinew on one side to keep the tensile strength. So those bows could keep their tensile strength for years and years, where other wooden bows would begin to lose that snap after using them for several seasons. So this was another theme. there's also a ceremonial theme. So what's unknown about Yellowstone Park, I think, is that a lot of people went there to pray. It was seen as a very, powerful, spiritual place. Right there at Mammoth Hot Springs, there was a famous Crow medicine man that he was about, I think he was probably about 30 years older than Pliny Coos. So this guy was probably born around 1820, and his name was Fringe. He had two names. He's known more popularly as the Fringe, like a buckskin fringe. But then the other name that he had that was given to him later on in life is Old Man Water, because he would go to the Yellowstone Park and he fasted at all these different areas around there, and he would just go without water, food or water, for 4 days. And he wasn't the only one. There were other people who would go there, not just in Mammoth, but also around the Geyser area, and even over to Thermopolis, which of course is not inside the park, but just in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And a lot of the thermal features, he saw them as a spiritual form of medicine that he would tap into. So that's another theme. And then of course there's the origin story theme about the stories that associate the morning star, also a couple different constellations, and how those constellations in the morning star are directly connected to geothermal features in the Yellowstone Park. So it's a very essential place for the Apsalagat and other tribes. There are other tribes that have origin stories associated with the Yellowstone Park. The Kootenai, for example. And talking about the Kootenai, they're really the only language isolate tribe here in Montana. So all the other tribes here in Montana have a larger language base that is outside of the state. Thinking about Algonquin, the Siouan, our Salish-speaking language, or Uto-Aztecan, the Shoshone. Their larger language families are elsewhere, where there's more water, where there's more trees, thinking about the Great Lakes area or over along the coast. And these kind of offshoots from these larger language groups eventually made their way into Montana and called this place their home. But the only group that we know of here in this state that doesn't have a language family elsewhere are the Kootenai. So they are, I guess, the Montana tribe. They've been here. We have to assume their language was developed here. And so they came down. They had a ambassador come to the Teepee village, and he told the Kootenai origin story last summer in the park. And it's a pretty awesome story. But I guess the highlight of it is that at the beginning of the world there was a giant, and he kind of made everything, and then he laid down and fell asleep here. And he's the Rocky Mountains, his body, his backbone, and then his head is the Yellowstone Park. And I just thought that made so much sense, scientifically and so many other ways. But that's a story, again, that not very many people know about. I don't think it's been ever written down or published. And so we want to hopefully, again, let the public know about some of these stories so that we can begin to look at the park with new eyes. And I think enrich our understanding of the park. And then back to the themes that I identified in making meaning in medicine in the land of the burning ground. It was the Yellowstone Park, for the tribes that came through there and went there, was just an essential part of their seasonal rounds. All the tribes here and many west of the Divide who lived in a seasonal cycle. So, they had to hunker down for the winter, once winter was over and it was, travel season, a lot of them would go to the park to harvest obsidian. While they were there, they would trade and gather all the other things, the plants, the animals. We know outside of Yellowstone Park, down in the Paradise Valley there are 70 miles, there have been 70 miles worth of rock drive lines identified there. And so the 70 miles of lines were used to harvest bison at buffalo jumps there in the Paradise Valley, just north of the park. And those lines have been dated back at least 1,000 years. The bigger lines, we see big rock cairns that go up to like 3 feet high and go on and on for hundreds of yards. Those are more recent. Those are within the past several hundred years, and they required a substantial time commitment and effort on the part of those hunter-gatherers there in the Paradise Valley. And so, knowing that the Paradise Valley was an essential hunting spot, and by the way, those rock lines that they've identified, there's no other place that's comparable that has been identified by archaeologists, not on this continent or any other continent. There's one place in Syria that's several thousand years old, that rock lines have been identified that were used to kind of funnel migrating antelope, gazelles, and then were harvested several thousand years ago, but nothing to the extent like we see here in the Paradise Valley. And so it's not a very big leap to make that these folks who were hunting there were probably following the river upstream, knew exactly where the Obsidian Cliff is extremely accessible by any measure. All you have to do is follow the creek. It'll take you right to the Obsidian Cliff. And thinking about the archaeological evidence that we've found in Ohio, there have been over 600 pounds of obsidian from the Yellowstone Park recovered in Ohio, and Hopewellian mounds, and that's over 1,000 years old as well. So it's pretty clear that passageway through the Paradise Valley, down the Yellowstone River, up the Gardner River, over to Sheepeater Cliff, which is another very popular spot for tourists today. And then, the river again kind of curls around straight back over to the Obsidian Cliff. That was a thoroughfare and has been a thoroughfare for many people for a very long time. And I think once you start to look at the other access points to the Yellowstone Park, for example, the west side or the southern side, which is connected to the Tetons, this is not bison country. Those people over there are more commonly referred to as salmon eaters. And then you head, further to the south, and they're more root eaters, and the predominant culture of this region was bison culture, and that was here on the northern plains. That was not on the interior of the mountains. So even though we had, people coming from that direction and trading and harvesting and doing all those things, it wasn't the same. It wasn't. There weren't as many tribes. There weren't as large amount of people. You're thinking about the Paradise Valley. You have the Crow people there. Of course, you have Blackfeet, and all the other tribes, the Crees, further north, and then, of course, in the 19th century, everyone who's here today in Montana. And I wanted to just take a moment to share this map with you here. This map was actually drawn back in 1801. So this map is over 200 years old, 222 years old. And I know it's kind of hard to see from where you're sitting, but Would anyone like to take a guess at what this map is trying to show or symbolize? First, let me give you a little background on the map. Okay, the map was drawn by a fur trapper named Peter Fiddler, and it's more commonly known as Fiddler's Map. But he got the information from a Blackfoot chief named Feathers. And so Peter came out to the Saskatchewan, the confluence of the Red Deer and Saskatchewan rivers in Canada on the eastern front of the Rockies back in 1800, right at the end of the summer. And he built a fort. And he asked all of the different Indians to come and tell him about the area because he wanted to map it for the fur company he was working for. And so he had a lot of different natives come in over the course of the fall. He had several different visitors. They came in, they shared different pieces of information about rivers and such mountains. And then in February of 1801, a Blackfoot chief by the name of Feathers came in, and he asked Peter to come outside because he was going to draw him a map on the ground. And this is what he drew. And then Peter put all this in his journal. Yeah. So this, I think, is a crease in the book. So don't pay any attention to that. Actually, it just happens to coincide. It's also the Missouri River. Yeah. And it's also in the middle of the book. Peter was up here when he drew the map. Feathers was up here. This is the Red Deer and Saskatchewan confluence. And then he goes and he names, Feathers names every tributary of the Missouri River from the Milk River all the way down through Montana into central Wyoming. This is the Bighorn River right here. This map covers 500,000 square miles. It's incomparable. There's never been a map that has been taken from an oral tradition and put onto paper that covers 500,000 square miles. So it's an interesting phenomenon. But there's more to it. There's much more to it. So does anyone want to take a guess at what these lines are here?
Rivers.
Yeah, those are the mountains. That's the Continental Divide. So Feathers was trying to tell him, there's two rivers here. This is the Snake and this is the Columbia up here. And so he tries to tell him, there's no river that goes across. There's rivers on this side and there's a whole bunch on this other side, but there's nothing that goes across. And then he draws two lines to show the Continental Divide. So this information here was really important to these folks at the time. And also, he added ethnographic data to the map. So he told them how many days travel. Actually, if you blow it up and you look at this writing here, it's not how many days, it's how many nights. So how many nights travel from here to there between each river. Then he names how many lodges there are along each river and the name of each tribe. And he puts that information down here. He also names the head man, the head chief of each tribe. This is 1801.
So prior to Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, in fact, let me give you the rest of the story. Paul Harvey. I know everyone in here knows Paul Harvey. Exactly, good day. But But let me finish the final little details here. So he gets all the ethnographic information, how many days travel, the names of all the different people, and he puts it all, records it all in here. And then he gives it to a courier and he tells him, take this back to London and incorporate it into the modern map of the day. And so this took about a couple years. Take it all the way across Canada, across the Atlantic Ocean, makes it to London. You know, the cartographers take a look at it. By the time they get it, it's been stripped of all of its ethnographic information. They take all the data out, they take the names of the tribes out, they take the nights traveled, they take the continental divide out. And then they write it all, they draw it into the map of the day, and then they said, here, go ahead and ship this back to America now. So they gave it to another courier and it got sent across the Atlantic, and then it got picked up by the intelligentsia, the American intelligentsia. Oh, we better get this to the president. So they sent it to Thomas Jefferson, and he said, oh, I'm going to give this to Meriwether Lewis. So the map that Lewis and Clark used on their trip came a lot from this, but because there was so much lost in translation, there was no real data gathered from the map. And if you look at the map, and I've done lessons on it, it's indecipherable because like I said, the continental divide was taken out, and so without that feature, it's hard to know, where things are going. But I put this in there. I like to talk about this map because at the heart of this map is Yellowstone. Because the Missouri River starts in Yellowstone, the Yellowstone River starts in Yellowstone, and when you look at this map, we know in Montana we've got two big drainages. We have the north, we have the Missouri River in the north, we've got the Yellowstone down here. Montana is very special because all the water, is like, get me out of Wyoming, and I don't, I can't blame it, And so it's like hooking its way here. And then if you head to the north part of Montana, we've got tributaries flowing from the north, pouring into the Missouri. And a lot of that is from the Ice Age, of course. We had these huge glaciers that kind of pushed the Missouri River down northward. So we've got all these drainages coming into Montana, and it could get complicated if you say, well, you've got all these different drainages, you've got the Missouri and you've got the Yellowstone, or you could make it real simple. And if you really wanted to simplify it, you could say, well, everything ends up going into the Missouri, right? This whole area here is the Missouri River drainage. Now, if we're able to just draw a little map that we can see in our mind's eye and that we can use as just a useful tool to navigate, to understand where we're at, to get a sense of place, to put context to our spot on the globe. And I think that's one of the things that as people we're always doing. It's a never-ending process, trying to contextualize our place. Where are we? What exactly it is about this place that brought people here. Why do we continue to stay here? And I think looking more deeply into history, we see that Montana has always been a very special place. I don't think it's any accident that 12,600-year-old burial is over there on the upper Yellowstone River. I think you look at the island mountain ranges that Montana has, you look at the rivers that we have, you look at the meadows, of course, the prairies, which were all home for the bison, elk, and deer. It's just a real blessed place with so many different resources, and I think that's why we have 13 tribes here in Montana, 7 reservations. But when you go to Wyoming, there's only 1 reservation and 2 tribes. When you go to Idaho, there's really only like 2 reservations and 2 tribes. And you go to Canada, it's big, but there's really only Cree and Blackfeet. And then you go to the Dakotas, and it's pretty much all Dakota, Lakota people. But then you come here to Montana, and you see this wide array diversity. And that's how the sign language eventually came about. Because you have all these different groups, they're all speaking different languages, and they need a way to communicate that will, cross those linguistic barriers. And so that's how they developed it. It was developed here in our region. I think Yellowstone Park is a great example of that. Nexus, I think it's a cultural nexus. People coming from all directions. And I think, you go back in time, all those years ago when people really were just walking. They had no horses. Their beasts of burden were dogs. We love dogs, all of us, but they're not that great at carrying teepee poles. I know I would never do that to my dog.
He wouldn't let you.
He wouldn't let me, yeah. He would be like, I'm not doing this. So, they were good for carrying little things, but the days of really roaming around carrying lodges didn't really come until horses. And so, we're thinking about how people were walking everywhere, and they had very few material possessions because they really didn't have anything to pack all their stuff, and they really didn't have a lot of stuff, and they had to move seasonally. So that again cuts back on what you're going to be carrying, right, as you move from your winter camp out to your summer camp. And so all of those different circumstances allowed them an opportunity to have peaceful relations with each other and not feel threatened or feel like you're going to be cut out of some kind of resource by your neighbor. That comes much later, in the 19th century when bison start to disappear and there's horses here and rifles, and disease has kind of collapsed these communities. The other thing about these communities and how the sign language got started was they were very stable. And that stability came because they had people of all ages. They had everyone all down the line, elders all the way down to babies. When you have a community that consists of all those different pieces, then you have stability. Over time, it becomes sustainable, and there's wisdom that's imparted from elders down to the next generation, and then that eventually makes its way to the children. And what happened here during the 19th century was the disease kind of shattered that system. Your elders are all gone now, there goes your stability. And then out the door with your stability also goes your economic livelihood, because the bison are starting to disappear. And then you've got more tribes coming into the region that are already starting to threaten this smaller share of resources. I think that's where the real conflict came. But when you go back and you take a look at this map and you ask yourself, how did this guy know all this information? I think there's no way he could have gone all these places, and all this information too. He was telling Peter, this is all up to date. This isn't old. This is right now. So these guys, it was very important for them. They didn't want yesterday's news. They wanted to know what was happening right now. And how did they know what was happening right now? There's no way that he could have traveled all that way. I think it was a sign language. They were communicating with their neighbors told them what was happening with their neighbors, and so on and so forth. So you have a communication, a train of communication that's really remarkable for its day and age. And most especially because of the linguistic diversity of the region. I think that's the facet to me that is most remarkable. These guys were all speaking different languages. How could he have known all this? And I think it was, again, because they had these relations that we don't really know about, because, again, the sign language is an oral tradition. I think there might be 2 books written on it. The best one was written in the 1930s by Tompkins, is his name. And he was a huge fan of the sign language. You know, when he wrote about it, he stated up front, there's no other language in the world like this language. I mean, there's no words in this language, it's purely conceptual. It's the only lingua franca that we know of that's not colonial. So, you know, this doesn't belong to one group. This was developed simultaneously by multi-linguistic groups over the course of several generations. So that all implies stable and consistent relationships that had to be supported, had to be nourished. And then it wasn't just one summer or 2 summers, it was many summers, many summers. And then the language had to be propagated by parents teaching it to their children. So why would people teach their children a sign language if they could speak to them? You know, because they knew that their children needed to be bilingual. If they wanted to succeed in this world, they had to be able to get along with the Blackfeet, the Shoshone. They had to get along with the Nez Perce when they came. Anyone around here. And that's what that language gave you. Even the Lewis and Clark expedition. You know, George Druyard, he was their sign language expert. That was one of the reasons they brought him along. You know, his mother was Shawnee, and he could speak the language. You know, there was 44 different tribes that spoke that. And everywhere that they went, that's what they relied upon for all their communication. Imagine if that had not existed. You know, it would have been a completely different experience, not just for them, but for everyone in this region. You know, and again, it's quite an achievement, honestly. I think it's been overlooked by anthropologists and continues to be overlooked, and it continues to be, I think, looked at as merely a trade language. And from that perspective, an economic trade language. But this was a trade language that was far more than economic. It was cultural. I mean, these folks were sharing songs, they were sharing ceremonies, you know, ways of knowing. They were sharing knowledge about the plants, the animals. So that's one of the things I've been trying to delve more deeply into, and hoping to articulate these things a little bit more in a written fashion, hopefully here within the next year or two. But stuff that I've been thinking about a lot, because coming from Montana, I've always really been interested in that. You know, we could go on about the shared traits, cultural aspects of the Montana tribes. How is it that you have all these different languages, but yet they sing the same kind of music? You know, if you grew up on the Crow Indian Reservation singing that kind of music, you could drive to Browning, sit down at a drum, learn that song right away. You could drive to Fort Peck, same thing. Anywhere, Rocky Boy, you know, you could go up into Canada, you could go down to Wind River and sit at a drum group, and you could learn that song right away, because the song is, you know, the structures of the song basically the same. What about lodges? That's another real fascinating thing. You know, they all had lodges, but they were all sewn differently, how they stitched the hides together. So there's this fascinating combination of sameness and difference, I think, that really captures the imagination here in Montana. And I don't think, you just don't see that anywhere else. You know, you go to the Southwest, you see the Pueblos down there, they have a lot of different cultural features that they share, but they really were not sign language using people. You go west of the Divide or into the Plateau, so much more sparsely populated. There were not bison there. It was a totally different economy. And then you head, you know, far to the east into the woodlands. Now you're in a completely different ecosystem. You know, you're not on the plains anymore, and all the different aspects of the northern plains that made the economy and every way of life here possible are not there. For example, medicine wheels. They would never work in a forest, right? Because you can't see the sky, and then you'd have to clear the trees out before you put the rocks down. And good luck finding rocks, with all the deciduous leaves that have fallen over hundreds, thousands of years. You got a pretty good soil there, and you're not going to see the kind of rocks that we find out here prevalent. So, I think where we live is a place that we're still learning about. And I think we're still discovering that Yellowstone is at the heart of it all. It really is. It's where the water comes from. It's where the culture comes from. It's where people have always come together. And you think about, is there any other place along the Continental Divide area where you would find tribes coming together for different reasons? And there's really nothing like Yellowstone. Because again, all these different entrances, all you got to do is follow the river. And the knowledge that that area was so sacred, and that the people who lived here for thousands of years lived a ceremonial way of life. And I think in some form or another, most Montanans continue to live a ceremonial way of life. And it really comes out in March. After a long winter, we're waiting for the grass to get green and the snow to melt. We have to kind of, find that spirit of ceremony in ourselves and just be patient. Remember where we're at, and everything will eventually turn green. And I think those are lessons that the land teaches us, and that the people who lived here, learn so well. And that's why we go to Yellowstone today. And I'm talking to the folks over in Yellowstone Park. I tell them, people go to the Yellowstone Park for the same reasons as they always did: to be renewed. To be there in a place where you can really feel nature's power, and it's so healing, and you want to share that with your children, you want to share that with your grandparents, you want to share that with your neighbors, and you want to know in good faith that this is something that we're going to always have, because it's shown, it's proven its value. I think no one would argue that the Yellowstone Park has proven its value in so many ways. So I'm going to pause there. I know it's right at 1 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but are there any questions that I could take for?
How did that map get saved?
Now this map here, yeah, great question. How did this map get saved? Now this was in Peter Fiddler's journal. Yep. So, this map, I first saw this map in a book called Another America. And in that book, there are a lot of maps from indigenous people all throughout the continent. But again, this one was right at the first map that he talked about, and it's kind of incomparable. And then I found a digital copy of it on the North Dakota website. And I'm not exactly sure how North Dakota got a hold of it, but they do some pretty cool things over there in North Dakota. And so I kind of copied it, and then I took it and made a lesson plan of it for the National Park Service on the Lewis and Clark Trail. And that's on a website called Honoring Tribal Legacies Along the Lewis and Clark Trail. Yes, ma'am?
How can we get a copy of that?
How can you get a copy of this? I can send a copy to Kevin. It's funny you asked that. I gave a presentation a couple months ago in Bozeman to this mapping group, and there was a guy who wanted a digital copy. I sent him a digital copy. He took it to the printer there on campus and had it blown up, and then he put it in his office. I was amazed, and he took a picture and sent it to me. And when you blow it up, you can read all the names, the knights, that's when I saw that thing about the knights, and I was like, oh wow, I've never thought of it that way.
Are the Knights in the bottom left?
Yeah, yep, I think that's where they are. Yeah.
Well, through the oral legacy of this map, how has anybody tried to overlay it and see, you know, the oral legacy, how, where's the accuracy? You know, I know that the topography has adjusted, but how accurate was that oral legacy that they were presenting at that time?
It's a great question. You know, not much has been done with this map. That's one of the frustrating things, and also, I guess, great opportunities, is that we really need to look more closely into it. I've never tried to overlay it. You know, the first thing I thought of when I first looked at it was, well, it doesn't match up to Montana because, you know, looking at the state, you see the Missouri, like I said, north, and then you see the Yellowstone down here, and they don't really come together until North Dakota. And then I thought, well, that's just us looking at imaginary lines on the ground. If you take those imaginary lines out and you don't say Montana, North Dakota, then it does look like a big old thing. And then I thought, well, that's like the medicine wheel, because, you know, the medicine wheel is like a three-dimensional map, and so they would use it to, you know, align to the different celestial, right? Because in Montana we always see the sky, but then what about points on the ground? Right, so they could also use that medicine wheel to say, you know, you go down that way, and that's where the Yellowstone River starts. You know what I mean? So we really need to, and the medicine wheels have been used by all these tribes, and especially the Blackfeet. And this is a Blackfoot map, and I think that guy, the Feathers, again, was like an oral history person for his tribe, and I think we need to study the map to study this guy, if we can get any more information about this guy or what kind of legacy he left behind. So yeah, I appreciate your question, and I'm sorry I can't answer it more.
Well,
But
it'd be interesting tracking migration, that oral history with this demographic map, you know, with him knowing the tribal heads of each one,
Yeah.
the number of locations they would be at, would also benefit not just the Crow or the Sioux, but, you know, Kootenai at the same time, stuck
Yep.
up in their own little world up there, so.
yeah, they really are.
I mean, we got everything up there, we don't want to leave it, but you guys go ahead and do what you want.
Yeah, they tend to be pretty self-sufficient in a lot of ways. I think it'd be really cool to have this map just as on public display, you know, like at the university or something. Did you have a question?
I do. How much of the sign language did we maintain, and what is used today?
You know, people don't really use the sign language anymore today, just as a common practice, but there are a couple institutes that study sign language. One of them's in Canada. We had at Little Bighorn College, Lanny Reelberg designed some materials and a sign language video. But, you know, my dream is to do an app, a sign language app. Yeah, and you know, you could just kind of say like, show me or tell me how to say, you know, goodbye. You know, well, there's no word for goodbye. Oh, okay, well, tell me how to say I'll see you later. In sign language, they say, until I see you again, may the sun rise in your heart. Isn't that beautiful? When I heard that, I thought, that's Shakespearean. You know, I mean, that's like a sonnet. And then like this whole imagery of the sun rising in your heart, it's just a real, it's the kind of thing I think that gives you hope for humanity. And the sign language itself gives me hope for humanity. It shows me that we need each other so badly, and we want to communicate with each other so badly that we'll really do anything it takes if given the opportunity to communicate with each other. And so that language could be revived. I think it should be revived. It should be like Montana's official language. We should make the legislators use it when they're in session. Thank you. But no, thanks again everyone for being patient and waiting for me today. Again, I'm so sorry. And by the way, if you drive to Bozeman, you know, give yourself an extra half an hour, because it's gonna. I was going 45 all the way past, you know, Laurel. And then I had some stuff at my house going. The kids are here home for the summer, and my daughter needed to be driven over to her YMCA camp, so I don't want to make any excuses, but so thankful again, Kevin, for the invitation. It's always great to be back here in Billings. You know, my hometown. I live in Bozeman, been living there for off and on for about 30 years, but you know, this is kind of where I grew up here in Billings, and so love being here, and so thankful for all of you coming and listening, and I hope you're able to get the articles online if you're interested in learning more, reading about it. Jake Fleming, is that his name? I don't think that's it. He wrote the article in the Gazette. Yes, Jake Iverson, very thoughtful, very articulate, wonderful writer. And I thought he wrote the best piece about the Teepee village. And the name of the piece is We're Still Here. And just really appreciated all the great words that he said. And hopefully in the years to come, next summer we'll have the Teepee village again, so keep your eye out for that. I'll keep Kevin posted, and he can kind of put that up on the Facebook page or what have you. So thanks again. Thank you so much.